Elak here again. This is June 22nd, 2017. This lesson, I'll title it Verifying Paleo-Hebrew. So in my search for the language that Abraham was speaking, I have to keep in mind that I'm really searching for the language that was there before Abraham. Because we hear about Father Abraham so much that we just have to keep in mind that there are people who lived before Abraham who were following the Most High. And a lot of times, I've seen people talk about Abraham's language, what language did he speak, and so on. Nobody is asking what language did Noah speak to Taf. So it's like we don't connect language with Noah, we just connect the ark and the flood with Noah. But when we look at this Paleo-Hebrew, because I've had people trying to help me and they mentioned the Paleo-Hebrew, but I'm wondering myself, what really is this Paleo-Hebrew? Because Paleo-Hebrew, when you look at it with this modern Hebrew, some people have said, and I've decided that myself by looking into the issue now, that maybe some of these Hebrew words that we've got are just made up, because this Hebrew, this modern Hebrew, in part seems to be made up itself, like it's a made up language. Because from the first video I think I did on this Hebrew language search, once I saw Hebrew coming in at around 1000 BC, that's around the time of King David, flags just went up, red flags. It's like, okay, so the Hebrews weren't speaking anything before King David? So if they were speaking Hebrew before King David, why is it that in about his time, Hebrew started? That means this Hebrew that we've got is not the ancient Hebrew. And it does not seem satisfying enough to me to say it's just because it's been modernized. Because another person who seems scholarly on the subject of the language will tell you they didn't change up the language itself, they just put in the little vowel markings. So if that's the case, then when you do away with the vowel markings, you should have the original or Paleo-Hebrew. But then you get other people who are scholarly on the matter will tell you, no, it's not the language, right? Some people are saying, no, this is not the original Hebrew, even if you take away the vowel pointings. So now when I think about Paleo-Hebrew, they'll show you some stuff, and I've said, this Hebrew looks like a Canaanite tongue. And if that is correct, then, because every time I search I keep seeing the Phoenician tongue, the Hebrew, Phoenician tongue. Hebrew is Phoenician. The Hebrew language, that is a Phoenician language, so you're dealing with a Canaanite language. So why is it a set-apart language or a language that the Hebrews had? If the Hebrews were there in Canaanite territory, shouldn't they have had their own language before they started speaking the Phoenician Canaanite tongue? So then they would have had more than one language. They would have had their own, plus they started speaking the Canaanite tongue. Like when Abraham went into Canaan, whatever he was speaking before, he was speaking, but when he got to where they were in Hebron, then he started speaking their language, because obviously he has to communicate with people, and he had to communicate with the Hittites. So now, as I was saying probably in a previous video, it seems like everywhere these people went, in the Bible, for the most part, if not all, you could just talk to anybody, anywhere you went, as if it's a Hollywood movie. Abraham traveled across the Euphrates, and wherever he stopped, he just starts talking to people just magically. And that's not enough, because it's one thing that he can just talk to them just like that. But they have no problems understanding him either. So someone was trying to help me with this. Actually, this was on Twitter, and they're saying lingua franca. But I still question that, although I have to keep that in mind, because lingua franca, is that just so magical that anywhere you come from, There's just that lingua franca that just makes people understand you no matter where you came from. So lingua franca, maybe you don't come from too far, so lingua franca will help bridge the two languages so you can communicate. But if somebody's coming from very far, you just automatically have a lingua franca in place to understand them, and lingua franca, that same lingua franca works to understand everybody else who comes from every other place. Because the people in the Old Testament, they just seem to speak to almost anyone, anywhere, at any time, no matter where they come from, which tribe they came from, which nation they came from, they can just speak. But when you read Genesis 10 and 11, you see that the different tribes of the earth, the different families of the earth, they had their all different separate languages. And then they got scattered abroad and so on. So if Abraham is trying to bury his wife and he's talking to the Hittites, that means Hittites are either able to speak Abraham's Hebrew set-apart tongue, or they are just able to magically understand him right away. And so it doesn't matter who the children of the Most High are dealing with, the ones who follow the Most High, from Adam coming on down. If they're traveling and moving around, or others are coming in across them in their territories and so on, they can all speak. A Hittite can understand the children of the Most High, an Assyrian can understand them, an Amorite can understand them, an Egyptian can understand them. I mean, everybody can understand everybody. It does not matter who you are, where you're coming from, you can understand for the most part. Because there might be just a one or two person who somehow needed some interpreter. But for the most part, you understand that anybody in the scripture almost can talk to anybody else in the scripture, no matter when they were born and where they were living. This is just... So... But when you look at the Paleo-Hebrew now, I want to introduce something here a little bit different to consider. And I know some of you have recommended that I talk to certain people. You've recommended a couple of people to talk to. I'm going to talk to them, but like I said before, you're not going to just get up and talk to me like that and respond so easily, because, I have to cover a certain amount on the topic first to make them feel like it's worth their time. So I'm troubling the waters with each of these videos, so they might more say, okay, let's respond to this guy, to this brother. But when you deal with Paleo-Hebrew, is it the case that Paleo-Hebrew just simply means an old language? Because if somebody says, yeah, the Hebrews were speaking Paleo-Hebrew, well, I'm not denying that they spoke Paleo-Hebrew, but if Abraham went to Hebron and he met Canaanites, and Canaanites were speaking Paleo-Hebrew, and so you say Abraham was able to communicate with them, so he was also speaking Paleo-Hebrew. Does that mean that Paleo-Hebrew is the original language? Because an old language or Paleo-Hebrew might not necessarily be synonymous with the original tongue. And Paleo-Hebrew might not necessarily be the language that Noah was speaking, that Shem was speaking, and so on, right? And that Adam was speaking. It might not necessarily be just because it's Paleo-Hebrew, because I always look at Paleo-Hebrew as just being an old language, more associated with the Phoenicians or the Canaanites in general. So Paleo-Hebrew then is just an old language. But if it's old, does that necessarily mean it was the first language? Because it might have been an old language that became popular, but is it the language that the people following the Most High, coming out of Eden and so on, were speaking? Keep in mind as well that the Most High is saying, I believe Zephaniah 3:9, that He's going to restore a perfect language. And we've been told that the quote-unquote perfect language has been lost. So the real Hebrew has been lost, but they tell us it's Paleo-Hebrew, and see, we got it here. Well, if you got it here, how come it's lost? Like, if you just found it, you can say, okay, it's been lost, but you just found it, so okay. But if you've had Paleo-Hebrew for so many centuries, how come it's lost? Well, we have the writings, but nobody knows how to say it. Well, we got people now who are making up their own language, or their own way of speaking it, and saying, this is the way the Paleo-Hebrew sounded. Then you've got people way before them who gave us the Bible in its present form, who has been translating the Bible for 1,000 years or more. So they would have had, and they said they found the Paleo-Hebrew inscriptions and so on, and the so-called original Paleo-Hebrew tongue that the Hebrews are speaking. So if they've had all these manuscripts for a couple thousand years, and have it in museums and so on, and you and I, we just found out this Hebrew Israelite stuff, and we start to figure out, no, the Lashawan Kadash, it sounds like this. Why are those people who've had the ancient scrolls in Paleo-Hebrew for 1,000 or 2,000 years, 3,000 years, why is it that they have not figured out how the Paleo-Hebrew sounded? And there must be people on the earth who are still speaking the original tongue. Because the more I look at life, it don't seem like it's been lost. Now, the Most High said he's going to return pure language. You think he's going to come down necessarily and teach us, like have us all gather and pack up in a classroom, and he's got a chalk, writing on a chalkboard and saying, ah, ba. No. It's more likely that people of the line of Shem are still alive, and they've had to keep this thing hidden and locked down and just can't use it publicly, or they will be killed. They will be killed. So it has to be hidden, is my guess. They got to keep them shut, be quiet, and so on. So the Paleo-Hebrew could just simply be an old language, but old doesn't necessarily mean the language that they were speaking. Paleo-Hebrew just means old, and someone gave us an old language that might have been similar to the real first original tongue. Yeah, it might have been similar, quite possibly. But doesn't necessarily mean it is. Because Paleo-Hebrew looks so cryptic, doesn't necessarily mean it was. So, yeah, Paleo-Hebrew, what really is it? Is it the language Abraham and Noah and all them were speaking? Or is it just an old language that we were given? Because you see, if you've got the Paleo-Hebrew scrolls, they say, but the scrolls they found has it on it, and we've got stone inscriptions as well and so on in Paleo-Hebrew. And well, that could also just simply mean that the people wrote the scrolls in Paleo-Hebrew because that's the language they had available at the time. Doesn't mean that was the original. So nobody seems to be proving the first language quite clear yet. And the more I look into it, people are arguing back and forth. So that's just my way of questioning the Paleo-Hebrew. Is it really the original? Or is it just simply an old language that became famous because Abraham went to the Canaanite territory, or the Hebrews were among the Phoenicians and so on?